Before we start this video, a large thank you to Park, Die Game Show, Daniel, Nepters7061, Glenn, Christopher, Arthur, and Oliver for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hello everybody, I hope your weekend was good. So if we go into the game here now, you can see that if we approach this gentleman, he's just going to walk continually at us. Kind of looks a little bit weird. Also, I've got his attacks taken off right now so you can see this more clearly, but he'll just basically infinitely keep walking at us, so we don't want that. What we want to do is add a stopping distance to this character. That way when they get too close, they'll just continue strafing to the side and they'll stop applying forward motion, or they'll stop altogether. So let's go to our combat stance state humanoid script. And by the way, if you want to apply this to the other combat stance state too, go ahead and do that. I'm not going to do it in this video, but remember this is for our player-like AI. If you have general AI that are still using the old system, do the same logic on the combat stance state there as well. So let's go down, and what we can do, I'm just going to minimize this. We can make a new function. I'm going to call this private void check if we are too close, and I'm going to pass the enemy manager, and I'm just going to say if enemy dot distance from target is less than or equal to enemy dot, what are we going to call this? We could call it minimum distance. No, actually I can think of something better. Let's just call it stopping distance. That's a good one. I think that's actually what it's called on the nav mesh agent. So if enemy dot stopping distance, if we're less than or equal to that, then we're going to say enemy dot animator dot set float. We're going to set our vertical float, because that's the forward movement, to 0 over a time of 0.2f by time dot delta time. Okay, I am forgetting something there. Whoops, what the time dot delta time part. So now we need to call this. Now there's a few ways. Oh, and we also need to make that variable for stopping distance, because right now that doesn't exist. So we should probably do that. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But we can call it first. It's not going to hurt. Now I can put this right above here on the distance check. But what you probably want to do, and it shouldn't really make a difference honestly, but you may want to put it right on the bottom of the function, so this is updated last. That way it doesn't get overridden by other movement. But if you put it here below the other two movements, you should be fine. You want this to be the last check, because that way it can override any movement if we're already positioning ourselves forward. Next, go to the enemy manager, and over here on AI settings, I'm just going to make a public float for my stopping distance. I'm going to initialize mine at, we'll say, 1.2f. And again, feel free to play around with that. If you have a bigger enemy, you might want a bigger stopping distance. Smaller enemy, smaller stopping distance, etc., etc. I'm just going to say how close we get to our target before stopping in forward movement, or I guess I could say in front of them, because sometimes our enemies don't have side movement because they don't strafe. Or halting forward movement. There we go. It's a good description. All right. Save that. And now let us go over to the combat stance. And you know, just to be sure, so I don't forget about this later, I am going to put this right at the bottom, because if we ever change how we're updating our movement here, and we just happen to position that after the check, then the check will get overridden. So just to be super safe, I'm going to make this the last thing we check. So if we are checking that, there we go. Good to go. All right. Now, let's go over here again, and what we can actually do is even erase the updating the movement at the top. Now that I think about it, we can erase both of these. What we can do is just put this inside of our new check if we're too close. But what we're going to do is we're going to say else, we'll apply both, and if we are too close, then we'll just apply the side movement and not the forward movement. So that way, we're just basically combining our code to make it a little bit neater. We're not rewriting something multiple times. And now let's go in here and hit play. And I'm just going to test this real quick. Oh, my apologies. I forgot to mute that. I'll do that right now. So if I get a bit close to him here, you can see there he goes. He kind of strafes around in circles and doesn't run straight at me anymore. I've actually upped my stopping distance to 1.82 just to try it. But and again, do whatever you want. But yeah, this looks a lot better. He kind of has the motion going around you now. It doesn't blindly just kind of try to give you a hug. You can also just, again, if the enemy has no left and right movement, you can just stop the movement and he'll just kind of stop in front of you. So, next on the docket, what if you want a stationary archer? So what if I want this guy to shoot at me, but not move from this position? This is just a nice little thing to have in certain areas. You don't want your archers kind of running off the battlements and pursuing your character. You want them to stay there and be annoying. Think of the Anne Orlando archers. So if I go over here to the enemy manager, let's actually add a bool for the archery settings. I'm going to call it is stationary archer. So let's go now over to the combat stance state again. And where we have our movement, specifically, first, let's go over to the process archer combat style, because this will only apply for the archer. And right at the very bottom where it says check if we're too close, we can actually rename that now because that actually handles our movement as well. So we can say first, if enemy is a stationary archer, and we can say else. Now, not only does this check if we're too close, this also handles our general movement. So now we can rename this to handle movement. And this will also encapsulate the code of checking if we're too close and then adjusting our movement. It's just all one function now to handle our general movement in the combat stance state. All right, so let's, oops, didn't mean to rename that again. Let's copy that, put that in the else, and if we are, a stationary archer, what we want to do is just make sure we're continually setting our horizontal and vertical to 0. Now, if you wanted to, you can do something really cool. You can make it so if this enemy gets hit, they turn into a non-stationary archer, if you wanted to do that. I'm not going to be pretty straightforward. You can do basically on a change to damage state, turn the bool from true to false if it is true. Something very simple like that. All right, save that. Now, over here on trigger enter on ranged projectile damage collider, this is very outdated. We're going to fix this. So let's go first and make sure we're setting our, well, actually, let's just copy that. Yeah, copy the damageable character layer. And right here on trigger enter, paste that. And we're going to change it from tag to gameObject.layer. So this is on range projectile damage collider. This is for our arrows. We're going to say if collision .gameObject.layer. Is that name to layer? I kind of forget. We'll figure it out here in a second. Let's erase this. Let's see. Not air. Whoops. Layer mask. That's the one. Dot layer to name. Nope, that's the reverse. I want name to layer. And then put in damageable character. And then let's proceed and update the rest of this code. So we're going to make it so our arrows fly more realistic and they also penetrate in a more realistic manner and behave more like arrows. Because although they are good now, we can make them better, and I like doing that. And this is a polished episode after all. So let's go into the pursue target humanoid state first, because I forgot to do something. Getting ahead of myself again. Let's make 2 private states, again, for process combat or process pursue logic archer and process pursue logic sword and shield. I'm just gonna call it process archer combat style, like I called it over here, and process sword and shield combat style. And you're asking, why are we doing this in the pursue target state? Well, because we don't want our archer to pursue the target if they are a stationary archer. So for that reason, it will have different logic than the sword and shield. So paste the normal logic you already have here in the sword and shield, and also in here say if enemy.combat style equals combat style sword and shield, then process or return process sword and shield combat style. Else if their combat style is archer, return process archer combat style. Now you can paste this logic into the archer style. We're just going to make one adjustment in here, and basically we're going to make it so if we are a stationary archer, we're not ever moving or setting our vertical movement to 1, because we don't want to ever be in pursuit of our target if we're just supposed to stand in one spot and shoot at them. All right, so let's call this in here as well, process archer combat style, and we're going to pass our enemy. And then we're going to say else if for some reason you don't meet any of these combat styles, which should be impossible, we're going to return this. All right, why does that give me grief? Oh, I know why. I forgot to use the return keyword. My bad, even though I just said that. Okay, copy and paste. There we go. Minimize that, save. And let's go down here. Okay, yeah. Now, where we're updating our movement to 1, what you want to do is first make a check. Normally you do nothing here if you were a stationary archer. So let's say if enemy dot is a stationary archer, or we can even say is not a stationary archer, then update movement. Because if we are, then we're not going to do anything. All right, let's put that there and save that. Now that should be working fine, but I want to make some adjustments to this arrow. So you can see here we have a trigger, which is our damage collider, and we have an actual capsule collider and a rigid body to make this arrow fly through the air. I don't like this. I changed it in Nephilim recently, made it a lot better. So since we've updated our limbs to support contact with only collisions on damage colliders, let's make this just a collision. Let's just make this damage collider, rather, an actual live collider, not a trigger. This will actually allow our functionality for arrow penetration to look more natural as well, and I'm going to show you another little trick to make the arrows sail through the air more naturally, so it has that natural drop off. I've tested this in Nephilim a lot, and I like it a lot. I don't know if you guys are in my Discord and you see the stuff I posted in show off, but we're going to make it behave more like that. All right, so let's go to the range projectile script. Yes, range projectile damage collider. And on trigger enter, we want to change that to on collision enter. And for some reason, my Visual Studio is not syncing up on this project with Unity's, I guess, settings. So this isn't turning blue, but it still works. So that's not override either. We don't have an on collision enter. This is just private void because this is not overriding on collision enter from the damage collider. Or on trigger enter, sorry. Change collider to collision or else it won't work. If you hover over it now, it should say on collision enter is called, and then you know you've got it right. So this is also a bit of old code. Let's update this. We're no longer needing to call the effects manager or the stats manager because we can get both of those things from the enemy manager. That looks good. Okay, so this will be collision.gameObject, or else this is going to give you grief. And then what you want to do is go to where it says, and this will be in parent also, because remember the new damageable limbs are children of the main character manager. That's important. So now go to wherever it says enemy stats, just say enemy manager.character stats manager. And likewise, if you're looking for the error that says enemy effects, it will be enemy manager.character effects manager. This will be a lot more cleaner when it's done. For some reason, we're checking for the team ID number here twice. Oh, I see what's happening. Yeah, I don't know why we have that here. I guess that was a typo on my part. We'll clean this up a bit anyway. Not that it's too dirty. There's not a lot going on here, but it definitely can be cleaned. Let's copy all of that because we're checking for enemy manager being null twice. Don't need to do that. Paste it back in here. I don't know why I did that before. We're also checking for team ID number twice. Don't know what was going on when I was writing this. So we're going to clean that up as well. There we go. Paste this, fix this. Now enemy effects, that'll be enemy manager.character effects manager. That looks good. I don't know what was going on when I was writing over this. I must have been half asleep. Okay. There we go. Fix this and this and this. Okay, we're good. Now let's get rid of that double check for the team ID number, and let's see. This needs to be collision.gameObject.tag. And this needs to be collision.gameObject.getComponent illusionary wall. All right, looks good. We're going to change the penetration logic in a second. Let me check my notes here. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So let's first make a reference to a rigid body for our arrow's rigid body and a capsule collider for our arrow's capsule collider. This is because we also need to deactivate the capsule collider when we're penetrating. This will allow us to get rid of the penetrated arrow model. We no longer need that. All right, so let's add a component here, rigid body, and let's drag that right up here to the top. Try again. There we go. Cool. And I'm just going to go back in here now and make an awake. I believe our damage collider has an awake, so I might need to say override awake because it's not letting me auto type awake, or that could be because my Visual Studio is not synced with Unity. Nope, it's because I'm not using override. Okay, cool. So now we can say base.awake, and then we can say arrow capsule collider equals get component capsule collider, arrow rigid body equals get component rigid body. Looks good so far. We're not done yet though. Let's go down here right at the bottom, and what we want to do is deactivate our capsule collider and make our rigid body kinematic when we penetrate into an object. That will stop the movement completely and kind of freeze the arrow where it is. So let's say arrow rigid body dot is kinematic equals true. And then we're going to say arrow capsule collider dot enabled equals false. This will stop the arrow from damaging any potential people it touches because the damage collider would be live otherwise. And even though it has stopped moving, it will still cause damage to anybody who touches it. All right, that looks good. We are still not done though. Now, if I go into the game here, I just kind of forgot something. If I fire this arrow, you're going to see it's not going to move. And that is simply because we actually need to put the capsule collider and the rigid body on the parent object. So let's copy everything here, copy component, and paste it on the parent up here. Again, must be on the parent object. So paste component as new, copy the capsule collider, paste component as new, and then copy the range damage collider. Now, because we're doing this, we're actually going to need to go to where we call this range damage collider, and we're going to need to make sure we say get component in parent. Otherwise, we'll never be able to call that. Delete that. Delete the arrow pivot and drag the arrow out. We don't need that anymore. And you should just have the arrow live model parent and just the arrow itself. Looks good. Change the layer to damage collider. No, just this object or both. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because the next object doesn't have a collider. All right, go back into fire arrow action. And where it says get component and children, just say get component. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to call this because there's nothing as a child component of the live arrow model anymore. It is now on the parent. Make sure you're changing it for both the AI and player if your code is just like mine, because the logic is a bit different down here for the AI, so we had to make a separate statement for it. All right, save that and go back into the scene view. Now, if I shoot, it fires, but now it goes through objects. So let's make another layer for just arrows and projectiles in general. And we're going to call it projectiles. And the only difference between projectiles and damage colliders is projectiles will collide with the environment as well. Just the environment, though. So go down here and make a new layer. Let's call the layer projectile, just like that. Go back, go to your game object again, assign the layer from damage collider to projectile if you want to. Yes, in children, doesn't really matter because there's no colliders on the other object. Project settings, let's go to physics, and then go down to your projectile and make sure it only collides with damageable character or default, and environment if you have that. I use default as my environment mostly, but I see I have an environment layer here, so I must have done something with that at some point or another. So just make it collide with only your environment and only your damageable character, not your character, because then it will collide with the capsule collider that your character uses to detect the environment. So just projectile, or just damageable character and just environment. If you wanted to, you can make it collide with other projectiles. That'd be kind of funny. You could shoot arrows out of the air. Now, on awake, you can see here, we're actually turning it to a trigger. We don't want that. So let's actually eradicate the base on awake here on our range projectile damage collider. I'm just realizing that now. And let's copy everything we need and then not use what we don't need. So we don't want to change it to a trigger on awake. We do not want that. But we do want to make sure it is active, and we do want to get damage collider equals get component collider. And we do want to enable it right away, regardless of whether it's enabled on startup, because it's an arrow. So let's paste that here, and then we're going to say damage collider dot enabled equals true. All right, now if we save that, make sure on your prefab too, it is not checked to a trigger. If it is, uncheck it. Now let's go back in here and copy all of this inside damageable character. We don't need to search for layer. I'm just not realizing that because it only detects on the layer of character or environment. So now we can save that and paste that back here. And now let's actually change the penetration logic. So let's delete the contact point. There's a better way to do this that will make it more realistic as well. Now let's put in here game object dot transform dot position is equal to whoops, not that. Did not mean to say that at all. Collision, we can use this now, dot get contact 0. This is basically the first contact point. And then we're going to say dot point. Just that simple. And now we can say right below that, game object dot transform dot rotation is equal to, you can say transform dot forward. That'll make sure the arrow, or quaternion dot look rotation transform dot forward. That makes sure the arrow is always facing in its forward direction on the point of contact. And then we should also say, right below here, we should be assigning the parent as well. But first, let's delete this penetrated model. We don't need this anymore now. We actually don't need to create a penetrated model. We can just use this one, and we're disabling the colliders on it. So delete all that logic, and then go delete this destroy object 2, and then go right up to the top and delete the penetrated arrow game object. What you can do is keep the destroy, but make it happen over time, and erase this too. So you can make it so the arrow will delete itself after, say, 20 seconds. I'm going to erase this checking for team ID number because we do it twice. No idea why I did that there. So going to get rid of that, and I'm going to paste the logic below it inside of that function. So I'm going to copy right up to here, copy that, delete it, and then right here where we're checking for enemy manager is not equal null, paste that in there. And now I will get rid of the double check for team ID. Save that. Now, let's do one more thing. Let's make sure this is a parent. Game object dot transform dot parent equals collision dot game object. I'm sorry, not dot game object. Collision dot collider dot transform. We want to parent it under the collider we've hit. And now let's make the arrow have realistic arrow drop. So if I go in here now, you're going to see it'll do this sometimes too. This weird kind of like, what is that? So we're going to fix that too. This will also make it so the arrow drops over time in a more realistic manner. So let's make a fixed update. And for some reason, it's not auto-completing for me. Don't know why Visual Studios is being odd with just this project. Try it again. No, it does not want to do that. All right, so I'm just going to say private void, fixed update. I'll hover over to make sure it's working. Fixed update. Okay. Let's see. Let me hover over that real quick. Yes, okay, it's called refix frame. We're good. So we're going to say if arrow rigid body dot velocity does not equal vector 3.0. So if it has some movement, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to adjust the transform by saying right down here, arrow rigid body dot rotation is equal to quaternion dot look rotation arrow rigid body dot velocity. Now I'm going to show you what that does. We're going to save that now. If I go into the game, check out this arrow. Watch. I'm going to shoot it. And look at that nice circular drop over time. So if I do it again, watch this. Just kind of comes down and has that realistic drop. And now if I approach this gentleman who should not move from his post, he should shoot me right in the face. And yes, there he goes. Okay, and the arrow sticks into our body. So as you can see, everything now is working a lot nicer. It looks a lot better. And this guy will just keep firing arrows at me. He will not move from his post. And the arrows do have a nice drop to them. I like that a lot. It looks really good. Alright guys, if you did make it this far and you enjoy the series, be sure to drop a like and leave a comment because it genuinely helps out my series so much. A special thank you, as always, my Patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. You're the reason I can keep doing this, and I love doing this. Alright guys, we're going to polish the project some more, but before we move on to another polish episode, I'm actually going to cover a thing we talked about in the past briefly called input queuing or action queuing. So I don't know if you've noticed in your projects right now, but if you are trying to basically have a combo happen, you might find yourself having to spam the right bumper in order to make it happen. But in Dark Souls, you notice you can just kind of tap it and it happens for you. This is because of a thing called action or input queuing. And what it does is when you hit an input during an action, for a certain amount of time, it will save that input and it will try to play it at the next available time. So we're going to get into that in the next video. And I'm going to give you a very simplistic and bare bones way to do it. Very similar to how I handle it in Nephilim. All right, I will see you guys in the next episode.